what brain areas, which cells, which molecules, how do they connect? How does that lead to behavior and states of mind, et cetera? And we also want to understand how that actually impacts like what everyday people would think of as depression or happiness or motivation or drive. And so my life is typical for a neuroscientist in the sense that we do experiments on humans and mice. It's unusual for a neuroscientist in the sense that my lab does work on a lot of things. And I also, we can talk about this, we don't just do experiments in my lab. Right now, for instance, we have a study going on with 125 human subjects that are out in the world wearing devices where we're monitoring their brain and body 24 hours a day. We're monitoring their body position 24 hours a day. And we are collecting data, neural data on them. So we do experiments in the lab and outside the lab. It's a long answer, but you know, the neuroscientist upstairs from me, he studies gut-brain interactions. 2 doors down from me studies neuroplasticity. 2 doors down from that, there's a woman studying navigation systems in the brain, kind of GPS systems in the brain. So you walk around my department or another neuroscience department, any other major place in the country or around the world, and people are just really obsessed with trying to figure out how this nervous system thing works from a different kind of narrower perspective.
So you're leading down the road I wanted to go, which I knew this would flow like this. So take this nervous system, and it's processing feelings, thoughts, sensations, meanings, these other things. And I'm sort of well known for saying, listen, it's not the events of your life that matter, it's the meaning you attach to those events. Yet, one of the things that the nervous system has sort of done is we've all sort of agreed to some consensus of what things are. So we've agreed to what certain colors are. We've agreed to certain what words mean, language. There's a general societal belief about certain things. So if that's true, but I've also heard you say your thoughts are a choice. So if it's this involuntary process that's happening where we've all sort of agreed to this and we're almost pre-programmed through a series of evolution to believe certain things, how is it also that we choose our thoughts?
Great question. It's the question that neuroscientists think about. And just as a bit of a disclaimer, there's going to be a little bit abstract, but I promise to get concrete, and I'll do my best to be as succinct as possible. Succinctness is not the quality that's typically associated with academics. Right. What I will promise, however, is I'll try and use as few acronyms as possible, and I'll only name things if I think it's going to be important for people to go look up more, as opposed to just raining terminology down on people, because that's not useful. Sure. So you are absolutely right. The nervous system is responsible for sensation, perception, feelings, thoughts, actions, and memories. All of that. Memories. Right. Let's talk about what's non-negotiable. What's non-negotiable are the sensations. I have receptors in my eye. You have receptors in your eye. We have receptors in our skin, in our tongue, in our ears, etc., that take physical events in the universe, of which there are many, and can only sense some of those. So for instance, I'm not a pit viper. I can't see in the infrared. A pit viper can. I can see in the infrared if I snap on infrared goggles, but if I don't do that, my eye can't sense those. So I can't sense magnetic fields. There are people that claim that they can sense magnetic fields. If they can, it's an unusual quality. It hasn't been shown very robustly in the lab. Turtles, on the other hand, navigate extremely long distances by virtue of magnetic fields. They are magnetosensing organisms. So the things that we can pull out of the universe and into our nervous system to work with, those are fixed entities. Now, a colorblind person, 1 in 80 males is red-green colorblind. They can't see reds the way you and I can. My dog is red-green colorblind. So there are some unusual cases, but in the absence of any technology, the sensations that we can detect are fixed. They are non-negotiable as much as gravity is non-negotiable. We have to develop technologies to overcome them if we want to see into the infrared or see ultraviolet light, etc. Okay. Now, perceptions, feelings, thoughts, those are where it gets negotiable. Because, for instance, I can decide that the color of your shirt has meaning to me, like we're both wearing a black shirt, and therefore we must have met in a previous lifetime, and pretty soon I'd start to sound like a crazy person. Because the definition of psychosis or crazy is assigning meaning to something for which there's none, right? So we have to agree as groups or groups of individuals and societally what what sorts of meanings matter. And that's where it gets very subjective. You know, we place value on the fact that somebody who commits a crime before the age 18 versus after 18, we call them an adult. But developmental trajectories are from birth to death, there isn't some cliff that, you know, biological event as this person adult. So we could go really deep down this rabbit hole or not. But what we know is that sensations are non-negotiable. What we know is that societies and the way that we function as families and couples and in the workplace, they obey certain principles or rules of engagement that on average are adaptive for a given culture. Okay. So we meet, we say hello, we agree on these cultural things that because on average they're adaptive. Whereas if we met and we decide first we were going to fight, first of all, we both know you're going to win that. We're going to physically fight. And second of all, it's just not adaptive for the evolution of cultures, most cultures. There are circumstances where that's appropriate. So what's important for us to understand is that the human brain is very, very good at all these things: sensation, perception, feeling, thought, and action. It's also very good at two other things. One is interoception, paying attention to what's going on inside me, and exteroception, paying attention to what's going on in the outside world, and balancing the weight of one or the other in order to move adaptively through life. Now, and I'll just throw this out as one more kind of conceptual thing, but I promised I would make it more concrete as opposed to abstract. When we say it's adaptive, what we mean is that this neural machinery in our heads, literally, I've opened up a lot of skulls. I've held a lot of brains in my life. I teach neuroanatomy to medical students now for 10 years. I promise you, it's just meat in there, meat and some fluid. And so the neurons of the brain take sensations, and the only thing neurons can do, the only language they can speak, is to be electrically active at certain times and in certain sequences, like the keys on a piano. And it's this amazing thing, like it still inspires wonder in me when I think about it, that you do this, I do this, and we agree on some common rules of engagement that are adaptive. And it's what led us out of caves, hunter-gatherer cultures, technologies, the car, the plane, the iPhone. It's amazing. And I think the important thing to remember is that we are still in our evolution as a species. We are still trying to work out whether or not 10 hours a day with the smartphone is good or bad for us. We're still trying to figure out whether or not traveling to other planets is good or bad for us. What should we do about this COVID thing? Yeah. We're still trying to work this out. And the language that we do to work that out is neural language.
Yes.
And so I apologize if I made things more abstract than before, but
you didn't.
We just have to agree on some rules of a game, just like if we're going to play chess, we need to set up some constraints. And so those are the constraints in broad terms.
How do those, so good. So no, it's perfect, because I want to move it into like where we are in culture and also performance, just what you just said. And so I know what I teach, but I don't know that I always know why it works the way it does. So this nervous system, I'd like you to speak to, maybe it makes no impact, I have an assumption that it does, previous experience in life. And does the importance of something in one's life change one's sensory acuity to it? So what I mean by that is there's this great debate right now about racial and social issues. And so I've wondered if someone has not had an experience with something, that they literally perceive sensory-wise less of it. And if they've got a history of some sort of a situation with a racial issue or a sexual abuse or something like that, that they see or feel more of it because it's important to them. And perhaps that's why there are certain things in society we can't come to a consensus on, because importance in previous experience may change the way in which we gather this information. And on the other flip side of that, is that also then true to program yourself to win? That when something is important enough to you, you begin to see, feel, and hear things that will lead you towards those particular goals that you wouldn't see if it wasn't important in terms of your sensory acuity or your nervous system picking up on it, or are they not correlated in any way? Can you speak to both of those?
Sure. Again, a great set of questions. So a moment ago, I mentioned that, we have this interoception, which is really just paying attention to what's going on internally. Like I could stop now and think about how my stomach feels or my breathing, or, really go internal, or I can be externally focused. And that's what the nervous system is doing. The nervous system has some very basic jobs. It learns things. We're born into this world, and the organization of the nervous system when we come into this world is not a completely blank slate. It's designed to learn. It's a learning machine. The brain is amazing because it's the only organ that wires up itself, which is incredible.
Yeah.
So it's a self-learning, self-building machine. And for the early part of life, the goal of the brain is twofold. One is to maintain all the housekeeping stuff, keep the heart beating, keep digestion going, keep breathing going at a minimum to keep the organism alive, to keep us alive. And then it wants to learn things that are specific to its environment and learn the rules of these sensations. Objects fall down, not up, right? Mom walks in the room, she leaves the room, she comes back. On average, or doesn't, or learning these rules, contingencies, and then passing those off to reflexive parts of the nervous system. So just like a baby never has to think about taking a breath or governing its heartbeat with conscious thought, the nervous system wants to learn things and then push that to reflexive action. It's a lot of work to do what's called serial processing. Yes. Not cereal like eat, but like serial as in series. I know you know this, but just for those, maybe second language, English second language or something. So serial processing is hard for the nervous system. It's about thinking if A, then B, then C. Oh wait, was it C? Yes, A, B, then C. It's work, and it requires areas of the brain that are very metabolically costly to engage. It's why thinking hard kind of hurts. There's some strain associated with it. So the more we experience something, the more our reactions to it are going to become reflexive, for better or for worse. If it's a bad event, the nervous system, or it creates a sensation that's uncomfortable, the nervous system will create an association whereby we naturally start to avoid that thing, whether or not it's good for us or bad for us. If it's something that we like, we get rewarded and we want with a chemical, typically dopamine or serotonin, and we want to move toward that thing again. And that illustrates the other key feature of the nervous system that I think will help simplify some of this kind of overwhelming number of things that the brain can do and how it can do it, which is we have in our brain a few chemical systems that are called neuromodulators. They're not responsible for the communication between neurons. What they do is they modulate or change the likelihood that certain brain circuits will engage and other ones won't. And they fall into very specific categories. The most famous of these is the neuromodulator dopamine. Dopamine is released anytime we experience something we really, really like, but under very specific conditions. Anytime we are moving towards something and we think we're on the right path, dopamine is released. And this is nature's way of telling whatever neurons are active during that movement down that path. So this could be exercise, it could be a relationship breakthrough, it could be a business breakthrough, it could be learning some little piece of a puzzle that you're excited to learn, you've been straining on. It tells you more of that, more of those neural symphonies or neurons being active in the way they just were. Whatever you were doing just there, more of that. So it sends you down this path. And dopamine is very misunderstood. People think dopamine is about getting the reward. Dopamine is about sending you toward the reward. Think of it like a jet propulsion system.
Wow.
Right? It's not that just the finish line. It's a jet propulsion system. And every animal needed that. An animal
I'm going to give it back to you. I just got to say something. I think it's one of the most significant things ever said on the show, honestly. And it explains my own life experience or my relationships. I want you to hear what he just said, everybody. That you're getting more dopamine on average in the pursuit of your dream and your goal than you actually do with the attainment of it. And that maybe there's a little key here to, if dopamine's sort of a happiness drug, right? If you want to call it that.
Makes you feel good. Could
it not possibly be true that one of the keys of happiness in life is the pursuit of something great, the pursuit of growth, and that's the key, that you don't have to achieve everything in order to give yourself the gift of happiness. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just, that's so freaking significant, because I think a lot of people sort of cheat themselves from just the pursuit, because they think, well, I'll only be happy when I get there. I'm not qualified. I haven't read enough. I don't know enough people. I don't have enough context. And they stand still and they're not happy. And what they're missing is the science that tells us, actually, if you just begin to pursue this and show some progress towards it, that you're going to get that happiness you're seeking that you think you will only get when you get there. Correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you bring this up because, there's some concepts from psychology that we can start to weave into this. I can give examples from evolutionary biology. An animal that's thirsty goes out looking for water, and when it finds that first drop of clean water, dopamine is released. But maybe that's not the big lake that it needs, but that's going to tells it it's on the right path. And dopamine naturally causes neuroplasticity of whatever brain circuits were active previously. So it says, hey, whatever I did to get to this point, this milestone, not the finish line, that is something that I might want to repeat reflexively in the future. I might not want to have to work so hard to do that. Now, the cool thing about dopamine, many cool things about dopamine, and then it has a dark side. And we should talk about the dark side because and of course the dark side can be associated with drugs of abuse like cocaine and things, but there's a even more sinister dark side that I think a lot of people fall into this trap. So the great things about dopamine is it rewards us and it gives us energy. And when I say energy, I don't mean glycogen, I don't mean glucose, I mean neural energy. And the reason is effort of all kinds, whether or not you're writing with a pen, whether or not you're racing uphill with a weight vest, or whether or not you're, slogging it out through any discomfort, is generally associated with the neuromodulator adrenaline, also called epinephrine. Okay, so adrenaline in the body it's called adrenaline in the body. It's released from the adrenals. And then epinephrine in the brain is released from a couple places, but there's one particular place for the aficionados. It's called the locus ceruleus. It's in the brainstem. It wakes us up. It gives us a sense of urgency, and it's about effort. And it doesn't care if you're doing something out of love or out of hate, out of revenge. It does not care. These are neurochemicals, and they don't care about you or your life experience, but they are in your brain, and they are the engines. Okay?
Wow.
Now, the cool thing is, it gets you going, and it's the effort molecule. But the problem is too much epinephrine or adrenaline eventually triggers literally a quitting circuit. There was a study published in 2019 which showed that for every bout of effort, a bit of adrenaline or epinephrine is released. And once those accumulate enough times, it's like spending money on an account, a set of cells in the brain, they're called glial cells, activate, and they turn off voluntary control. This is the reason why if you're running, you eventually might just say, that's it, I give up. It's the despair moment, and it's a chemical moment. Now, we could go deep into that, but the important thing for now to understand is that dopamine allows the brain and the body to tolerate higher levels of epinephrine and to continue in effort, as well as pushing down that level of epinephrine. You've experienced this before, Ed. If you've been working really, really hard, and or something's just terrible, and you feel like you can't continue, and someone cracks a joke, instantaneously you have more levity, more energy. That couldn't have been liver glycogen or anything kind of in the body. That was neural energy. That was dopamine. Likewise, if you suddenly have the moment where you think you're at a breakthrough, not a falsely created belief like, oh, I'm performing well when I'm not performing well, but you have a breakthrough like, oh my goodness, I think I'm onto something. Yeah. You feel that more energy, and that's dopamine in action. And the beauty of dopamine is it's very subjective. Okay. There are chemicals that will release dopamine in the body, but it is very subjective. And so I always like to give the example, people always say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. But what's missing in those common phrases is that the key is to reward each bite subjectively. Or let's say you're full, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, you can't put it in more effort. If you subjectively reward and you say, I'm on the right path, effort is the path. And you start to tap into these systems, you develop what my colleague at Stanford, Carol Dweck, coined growth mindset, which is not just the belief that you can be better, but growth mindset at its core is about deriving dopamine release from the effort and strain process. It's about enjoying friction. And this is what people like you, David Goggins is a famous and shining example of this, and there are others as well, of course. So dopamine is your best friend in mitigating or making sure that the effort process is not self-limiting. And you have to regularly dose your behaviors and your thoughts with this dopamine association. And people get very hung up on this. They're like, wait, how do I know if I'm doing it right? Well, it's a skill you have to learn in your mind, because thoughts are spontaneous. They are like pop-ups on a poorly filtered internet. But thoughts can also be deliberate. I can decide to tell myself, look, I'm straining, but I'm going to reward this. I'm going to tell myself I'm on the right path. And the brain and the body don't know the difference. And this is not lying to yourself. This is not saying, oh, I'm really back on my heels, I'm performing poorly. It's not telling yourself you're performing well. It's telling yourself that performing itself, the verb effort, the verb of performing, is what you want to reward, not the noun.
Gigantic. I got to jump in again. Gigantic. Because one of the things that I teach the athletes I work with are the business people, and I love understanding why even more. But one of the things that I've noticed is people that continue to make an effort are intentional about acknowledging that effort to themselves. And you call it giving self credit or celebrating. So this is really critical, guys. If you've heard me say this before, Andrew's telling you why it works. The bottom line is that as you're making these effort deposits, it's being intentional and aware that you're doing it. Giving yourself credit for a real thing you're doing gives you this dopamine reward, and you continue to move forward. I want to go like 11 hours with you, bro. But I think I always want to pull out, like unpack, how's this application to the performance piece? And again, you athletes that are out there listening to this, that are doing this one more that I teach, when you do the one more, it's reminding yourself, I just did one more. Maybe you didn't lift more weight today. Maybe you didn't run faster. Maybe you missed 35 putts. But that effort deposit and that intentional acknowledgement of the effort reward is so critical in confidence, in happiness, in progress, as he's told you. Can I unpack another piece and ask a question about that?
Please. No, and I love your synthesis of it, because yes, please.
Okay. So you said something earlier, but I don't want to move past, because you hear people talk all the time about habits and rituals and, and that's like this vogue thing to talk about, right? But you said something earlier, but I want you to, if you would just explain again. One of the things I've learned from your work is this concept that you said earlier, but it was in the middle of so many gems, is that the brain would like to preserve energy, and I'll say it my way, and move to default reflexive mode. So as many things as it can process and just default to reflexive mode, rather than effort mode with critical thinking and adjustment, it will do. So your brain is constantly trying to find ways in situations and circumstances you're in to default to what you do reflexively. Okay. So would that not mean then, Andrew, that those things you do reflectively, called habits and rituals, better serve you, or you'll default continuously to the reflexive mode of drinking or laziness or the video game or Instagram? That's a reflective default mode. Some people, for stress, they encounter stress, the brain reflects to a default reflexive mode of whatever they do to cope with that stress. True?
Absolutely. I think I'm not alone in the noticing that occasionally I pick up my phone and I And the reason is that the brain and the nervous system are constantly seeking rewards and novelty. And if we're not deliberate about how we're doing that, we will do it entirely reflexively. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I enjoy social media. I teach neuroscience on Instagram. I enjoy doing that, and I enjoy the feedback, most of it. I'm human. Right. So, but I think the brain and nervous system wants to make things reflexive, and habits are very powerful because they set us on trajectories. Now, some people, they are uncomfortable with the fact that effort is the first gate that you have to go through in order to build this pathway that involves norepinephrine or adrenaline and epinephrine. And I sometimes people will jump on me about using norepinephrine and epinephrine interchangeably. I know they're not the same thing, but today we're just going to broadly describe them as systems in the brain and body, not get too down in the weeds. But the idea is you've got effort. You can associate that with adrenaline, epinephrine. You've got dopamine, which is your internal reward system, and it can be externally rewarded. So this is very important. There are intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards. There's a beautiful study that was done at Bing Nursery School at Stanford. I had nothing to do with this study in the mid-70s, where they took kids that like to draw, and they then rewarded some of those kids with just a little star, like kids like, the shiny star makes them special, for drawing. Then they took away the star next day or the next day, and the kids that liked drawing just for the intrinsic pleasure of it, they drew less. So so these reward systems can attach to external things or internal things. I have a good buddy. He's friends and co-founders of this company Made For that you talked to Blake Mycoskie about. His name is Pat Doss. He's a former Navy SEAL. And he and I were giving a talk once to a bunch of people, and we were talking about reward processes in the brain and how SEALs do it and what neuroscience thinks. And someone asked us a really good question. They said, how do I continue to tap into this dopamine system? And our answer was, be very careful with extrinsic rewards. Make sure that your dopamine system is attached more to the effort process than it ever is to any external reward. And it's because of a very important principle of dopamine rewards. It's what neuroscientists call dopamine reward prediction error. It is the reward prediction error is the reason why people that work in pursuit of a goal and then reach that